Welcome to the NMRA Coast Division Saturday Meetup recording from June 6th, 2020.
Is uh, Jesse is going to go through, kind of take us through his layout, not as a video, but as a set of pictures. I decided that was a lot better. What's really interesting is that what Jesse's done also, and he's going to send it to me and I'll send it out to everyone. He's actually done a little video, which was his Golden Spike Award presentation, so to speak. So let me share. I want to share this. If you've not seen this, this is actually the Golden Spike application form. And Earl can talk about it, or I can, but very simply, this is the qualification checklist at the bottom here. There are 3 areas. What's really interesting is if you're a modeler who's been modeling for a while, you've built a layout, built a module, built just about anything in that level, you've completed most of these. So one of the things that's really exciting here is Jesse's both going to show us his layout, but he's also going to talk about how that fulfilled the requirements for doing a Golden Spike Award. So I think it's something that almost everybody who's a member, who's been a member for 10 years and been modeling probably can do. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Jesse and let Jesse talk a little bit about his modeling and show us a little bit of his modeling and go from there. So Jesse, I think the court's all yours.
Okay, and now we're going to find out the wonders of how we do screen sharing. Let me start first. Okay, that's good. Now I click on that, and then I click on this, and hopefully.
Hey, can anybody who's not talking turn their mute on? Unfortunately, earlier I had audio problems and I ended up having to leave. When I did that, I assigned the hosting to Earl. Normally, I go around and I mute people if you're not presenting. So if you can do that, it'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I wanted to say that I did the Golden Spike Award. It seemed like, this is going to be a cinch and that sort of stuff. And actually, it was pretty easy. As Phil has said, if you've been modeling, the hardest part is cleaning up your layout so you can take some pictures and figure out what you're doing. What I did basically was I produced a video with motion pictures and still shots, and and it has all the sections and how I did this. And then what I'm going to do now is just pretty much go through just a brief look at some of the high points that I used. As a beginning, this is one of my many layouts. No, actually, I have 2 big layouts. 2 layouts. One is HO and the other is ON30. Now, this is looking down at the HO layout. We're looking, it's sort of a modified U shape. This is one leg, about 14 feet. You can see this is in the attic, which is my away place and that sort of thing.
Looks like a pretty good grade in the background there, Jesse.
Yeah, well, that's my rising up to to an N scale little village type of place there, and I try to run some gear locomotives double heading up there. This is looking down another piece of leg of the HO layout. And what we're doing here is we've got a small town, and then we've got 2 tunnel portals. The top one goes into the small town, and the bottom one goes off stage, so to speak, into a staging yard. Now this is, oh my God, look at all the trains he has, staging yard. And this is about 12 feet long. lessons learned. Don't construct this somewhere else and then try to wedge it in underneath the existing layout. Above it is part of the ON3 layout. Here's part of the card system. What's interesting here is that I triple head, I do a lash up with 3 engines in a couple of things here. And I spent a lot of time speed matching these guys so they actually can haul a bunch of cars up those terrible grades. This is the first area that I presented for the ON3. And what we've got here is, this is a coal mining town of Sherrill Mills, and it is essentially having modeled for a long time. Almost all of my HO layout are lifelike. One, there's cornerstone, design preservation parts, woodland scenics, all those kinds of things, kit bashed and built over the years. The requirement asks for 8 square feet of scenic layout. What we see here is about 8 to 10. The coal mine is a Walthers, and the tracks disappear into here, and each one continues off into the back. And we've got about a dozen cars on each track, so we can have loads in and empties in and loads out. We've got a station area, small downtown, industrial section, and some company housing. The answer to the question of who's Steve? Steve is a husband of my wife's friend, and he makes lousy coffee. So part of my video presentation indicates that there's no line in front of Steve's Diner because he really is an awful cook. This is the commercial area, and one of the things that we see here, as you can recognize a lot of the old plastic structures, Earl Smallshaw from Connecticut years ago, I worked with him for a short period of time, taught me if you can't see it, don't model it, and that way you get a lot of extra parts. So this building only has a back and a side. The rest is just sheet plastic. And in the next city scene, you'll see that I've used this extensively. This is company housing for the miners, a great fringe benefit. These are, I believe, Walthers houses at one time or another. There's up the hill here is a saloon and social club, and you may recognize some of the trees from my attempts to work at the Great American Train Show, popping these little fast trees in. There's a close-up of the social club, and there are 2 people negotiating some kind of social activity. The next area is the major metropolis, and that is the city of Crystal Springs. It's about a dozen square feet in size. We come in the passenger yard, which is under the downtown train station. We've got a lower industrial area. We've got factories and commercial things, and and more buildings and things of that nature. Again, this is where, if you can't see it, don't model it. So a lot of these are one and two-sided things. And way in the background there, these are placeholders, and they are printed paper on foam core or gator board backgrounds. The industrial area is a work in progress, a switching area, a switching puzzle, I guess. Again, another paper structure, a White Castle without decals yet. The tracks have been relayed in the last maybe 6 months or so, and at some point we'll finish in between the buildings and lay them down.
Hey, Jesse, how do you uncouple between the buildings? I mean, it
Well,
looks like it's a long reach from the aisle to get in
it's a
there.
long reach, and the theory is that we would use, I use these little U-shaped double magnets, and there's one that has a real long stick on it. So theoretically, we can do that. The other thing I was trying to do, and I've done it in one place, was between track magnets. KD has those things, and I tend to think I'll probably end up putting those in here and here, because this is really hard to get that stick down.
You can
It's
also
also
push.
hard to see what's in there.
You can push them back in there too, right?
Yeah,
Like the
you can
couplers.
push it back. You can do a little five-fingered car movement if you had to.
But the couplers, when the couplers are open on the magnet, if you push them together, they stay open. So you could put a magnet out by the switch, by the gap there by the switch, and then uncouple the cars there and then push them back with the couplers open to the place you wanted to leave them between the buildings.
Yeah, there's ways of doing it, and as I say, this is still a real work in progress. I'm just trying to get the structure built. In terms of what's where, the tracks are numbered, and then there's a little card sorting board, and you can stick the car cards into the spaces, and that'll give you a sense of what's here and what's there. This is the station, which is it's a very busy place. As you can see, people are coming and going. In fact, the same people are coming and going all the time because they're plastic and they're glued down. The vehicles are bulk purchased, if you will, from occasionally at toy stores and things of that nature. They're not, they're not fine scale models by any stretch. This is the not so grand 3-star hotel. And in the background, again, is commercial buildings, and the city of Crystal Springs is having their spring fashion extravaganza. So we've closed off the street and we've got a lot of folks walking in and out there. This picture is my wife Luisa's finest Spanish classes, her language school. And as you can see, her students are lined up here because this is an essential business, and therefore they have to be there for their classes. This at the top of that little rise that we just saw is the, oh Jesus, what is that? Oh, shut up. I'm sorry. at the top of the rise is the Cologne Juarez neighborhood. And this is behind the bus, around the bus terminal. And this is typical of many Central American cities where there's just a lot of activity behind the bus terminal. And we've got a little farmer's market, and we've got a doorway tortilla stand, and we've got these poorly painted buses and that sort of stuff. One of the things I'm very happy about is I found a use for the lady hanging clothes from Prizer figures. She seems to be helping load the truck. There she is again. So this is the HO, the two HO areas that I showed. And now we're at the ON 30 layout. Now this is a rectangle. This is a U shape again. It's about 12 feet long and only about 2.5 feet wide. And originally was built as modules, but again, that died a quiet death once I started scenicking. We arrive by luxury coach. And here's the greater downtown area. I'm going to talk about most of the structures shortly. Those were the ones that I used for the Golden Spike Award for there. This warehouse building is shipping and receiving. This is the end of the line, so to speak, for that little bit of railway. This building is a scratch built. It's got a Yada board or foam core interior, strip wood on the outside, Grant line windows, and it came out reasonably well and fit the space nicely. Across the street, we've got some more of the downtown area, and as I say, we'll be looking at some of these buildings in more detail in a minute. One of the things that I really did enjoy with the ON 30 layout is the background. I had a wonderful time painting the board and then building the trees and then building more trees and then building more trees. So this area really, I think, came together pretty nicely. One of the important sections, the first section actually for the Golden Spike, is to display 6 rail cars. I used 3 HO and 3 ON 30 cars. This is a Bachmann Spectrum ON 30. It came decorated, lettered, I mean, but it's been heavily weathered, and this is an old-fashioned tank car, as you can tell, where the tank is strapped to the surface of the flat car. Now this one is my current favorite car, and this started life as a Bachmann Drover caboose and took up the whole platform. So what I did was I hacked off everything pretty much in front of this spot here, put on a wood deck, railing, safety appurtenance, grab irons. Then to keep the weather out, I put down a tar paper roof and then used I have custom decals, and I decaled it.
Hey, Jesse, what did you use for the roof?
Oh, favorite thing, tissue paper, of course.
Okay.
The little, just strips of tissue paper, approximately a foot or 18 inches wide. Put down a layer of paint, black acrylic, put the tar paper down, the tissue paper, and then put a second layer of acrylic on top of it. If we ever get together for in-person contests, this will probably be an entry once I get some more stuff on the deck and things like that. The Golden Spike asks for half a dozen structures also. And so these are, since most of my HO structures are plastic kits, I do most of my modeling, my better modeling maybe, on ON30. So this is the first scratch-built building I built. It's strip wood. It's a little shed down by the station. The windows are Grant Line. And actually all my windows are Grant Line because at one point at an auction or on eBay, I bought this thumping great plastic bag full of Grant Line O-scale pieces. And so I've just got piles of windows and doors and single things, et cetera, et cetera. But they're getting used. The roof is painted, is printed tar paper that I got right offline. Now, I have always been butchering her name, but this is Zhou Ming Sun Key's tea shop, tea and coffee shop. Sun was my business partner, and this was, the lettering was basically all on the back of her business card because she worked in 2 languages. The tea house itself is again scratch built, and the front is Midwest sheet stock. It's called car siding, and then the rest is strip wood and painted paper and things like that. And hopefully nobody speaks Cantonese and can correct me, so I'm just going to go with the story about what that says up there, and hopefully it's not something lewd. My dentist's name is Fred, and Fred is a wonderful guy, and he gives me toothbrushes, so I figured he has to have a building to store his things. Now, Fred's dental supply, this is a scratchboard built structure. It's got an interior of foam core, a data board. It's got windows that came from, the windows came from Grant Line again. The door was scratch built. But the strip wood are wooden coffee stirring sticks, of which I bought a box of 500 of them, and they work just great. The roof is, again, printed paper. This was another less than this was early modeling success, so you can tell there's a little bit of the building of that leaves a little to be desired. The photos are from offline, from historic posters, and the subfloor and foundation is milled on my micro mark table saw from redwood pieces, and I've been doing a lot of that. now, making my own custom, if you will, pieces of wood for various levels.
Hey, Jesse, going back to that slide
Yes,
for a
sir.
second. The thing I think is interesting also on the main facade is you've changed the orientation of the wood. Some of it's horizontal and some is vertical, which
Oh,
makes it a little more interesting.
yeah. That's the good part about not having a plan and saying, oh, now what would they do here? Yeah, well, I'll put that wood up. Thank you very much. This is the Casper General Store, and this should be very familiar to a number of us because this migrates between the layout and the 1-foot diorama that we did. It's an RS Laser Craftsman kit, and what I did was I detailed the interior and the windows. The figures in the window are N scale. These little boxes are hearing aid batteries. This is rusty rail details. And a lot of these pieces in here are also three-dimensional details and photos. In terms of photos, these pictures up here, the posters, I took at an old town area in San Antonio, Texas. They had this in a shop and decorating the shop. And so we printed them. I photographed them and I printed them, and then I reduced them, then I and then so that's where they come from. Historically accurate, maybe. Casper Inn, that's a Banta Craftsman kit, the B&O Hotel. And this was the first Craftsman kit I tried to build. It goes together pretty well. Don't notice the fact that the front post is a little askew and that sort of thing. But the steps all line up, and I was pretty happy with it at the time. One of my best friends is named Tom Heller, and he is a woodworker. And he just has 2 sons, and he's constantly, he does woodwork like we do model railroading. So I built this is a scratch-built structure. It uses strip wood on the outside, and the frame is very thin ply. Actually, it's something called door skin, and it's I think it's a 16th or an 1/8 inch thick. It's very thin, but it's strong enough to set up as a frame. Inside the building is, if we repeat the strip wood, and as we say, through the magic of television, there's the interior. The pieces, again, are, this is some rusty rail, detailed things. There's some things on the table and stuff like that that were scratch built. The other interesting part about this is that neither Tom nor his sons play any musical instrument at all. And as they used to say at the end of the cartoon, that's all, folks.
That was great, Jesse. Thank you.
Oh, well, you don't know how thrilled I am that it actually worked.
Jesse, one thing I liked was when you were showing on the HO layout, and you had the shot of the rural town, is that the front of the buildings were away from the tracks and the back of the building was facing the tracks, which is appropriate because that's the way it usually was.
Yeah, you know, it works out. In the city also, in the city scene in HO, I do have a set of, I tried to use, like I say, all parts of the buildings. So there's a back street there, there's a street, and you see the backs of the buildings, and then you see the same buildings, but you see the fronts. So across the street.
So is the ON30 layout in your home also?
Yes, they're both, one's in the larger of the attic spaces, and the ON30 is in another sort of a dormer space. It's about, oh, I don't know, maybe 14 by 8 or something like that, which is a pretty good sized space, except half of it is taken up with sloped wall, or sloped roof. There's 2 staging areas in there. The upper one is the ON30 yard or staging area, and the lower one is that HO staging area. Also under the HO layout, there's another 3 or 4 track staging area, so that when I operate point to point from one staging area to the other.
Any other questions, comments? Very nice.
Thanks.
Excellent, Jesse. Really appreciate it. That was very nice.
The one other thing, I guess, is I have sent Earl and I think Phil, I've sent them my YouTube. It's a 2-part YouTube of the actual submission for the Golden Spike. So if anybody wants to see this as a presentation, it's available.
So I'm going to put that right now in the chat window. So the 2 videos are actually in the chat window now, part 1 and part 2.
And I watched those last night, and those are actually extremely well done, Jesse.
Well,
Yeah,
so the big question,
very kind.
the big question, Earl, is did you approve it after watching?
I just watched them quickly last night. I need to sit down and compare them against the paperwork.
Let's give him a hard time.
Yeah.
So by the way, for everyone, I mean, this is, I think Jesse's comments, really, it's about an hour to 2 hours probably, depending on how comprehensive your video is. I actually did mine in PowerPoint. I took and made a PowerPoint presentation, and if anyone wants the template, I can send you. It's just got a slide for each of the areas, and I just took pictures and put them in a slide and sent that to Earl too. But I think the point is, I mean, literally, I would suspect that if you haven't done it, almost everyone on this video could spend an hour and get a Golden Spike Award. Be a cool way of showing what we're doing.
Videos really just need to be maybe 10 or 15 minutes most. I think Chris's was 8 or 9 minutes. And, you know, we're doing this on a virtual mode right now until we can come out and see people's layouts. Once things open up, you know, we can come out and, you know, see it in person. So this is an interim measure.
Yeah, my submission, because my layout was in such disarray in terms of how things were laying around and everything, it actually did take me a fair amount of time to build it and get the pieces all in one place at one time. And also, I thought when I saw Chris's, which was so well done, he walked around with his camera, and I sort of felt that was an invitation to nausea if I did it. So I had to learn how to use the program, take the pictures, and then learn how to use iMovies or something like that on Apple. Then I had to learn how to get from iMovies to YouTube. And then I found out that I had too much stuff, so I had to break up the YouTube. You know, it was the doing of the thing. Phil, you're right. It probably is a day or so at the most. but it took me, it seems like forever to get this thing done.
But the good news is you got layout cleaning done. It's the same thing as doing a layout tour. It basically crystallizes you to get everything done that you ignore and you feel like you can live with personally, but you don't feel like you want other people to see.
Well, you don't want people, most of the time, you don't want people to fall down and kill themselves, or as my wife would say, when are you going to clean up that fire trap?
Good.
And to answer Mike O'Doherty's question that came up on chat, I did talk to Chris and he's allowing me to post that. So I will post a link to Chris's YouTube video for his golden spike.
Cool.
And
So it's
obviously you have my permission to use my videos also.
I think it's kind of a challenge. I think it's a great way if if you're kind of like me who's ignored the whole achievement program and that, it's a good way to start it off in a way that's easy to accomplish something. So cool. So that was our primary kind of content piece for today that had formally arranged. Is there anyone have anything? I just kind of go around and have anything they want to talk about, show, discuss, kind of free open discussion time.
Well, just for a good of the order thing, there's a notice on the the Railroad Radio Facebook page that apparently Jimmy Simmons is coming back into the world with Monster Model Works. So people who want some really neat laser cut wood models that are relatively easy to build and build up into great models, his stuff will be reappearing. He's got a link if you go to Facebook and search I guess Model Railroad Radio. He's got a posting on there, and it gives links to his Facebook stuff. So it's some really good models, reasonably priced, and build up very nicely.
I'm surprised he's coming back because didn't he get a real job or something and sold the business to someone else?
Well, he was a computer programmer when the computer industry went belly up way back when he started Monster Model Works. When it came back around and started revitalizing, he closed the business down, was putting it up for sale. It did not sell, apparently. And now that I think he's got a better handle on what's going on with the computer programming business and things like that. He's dabbling in, he's basically going to go after the high popularity detail parts, things like tie plates and some of his small brick wall castings, his street castings, things like that. And he's going to see which models are most popular and start producing just a limited run. So, I mean, if people get in touch with him and say, hey, this O-scale model you did is really neat, or this N-scale model was really, really special, he will consider those towards the priority runs, on a time available basis type of thing. He talks about that in his posting on the Facebook posting.
And just so people know, he doesn't have just kits, or at least he didn't used to have just kits. He had some laser cut brickwork and cobblestone streets and things like that were off of artwork. So the bricks aren't all perfectly uniform. They're weathered and they looked really, really good. I've got a lot of his stuff before he closed down.
I went out and bought a couple hundred tie plates. So when I start doing my bridge, I will have the tie plates to build the darn thing. But and hopefully those people who are at Bakersfield for the last PCR convention down there and sat in on his weathering clinic, the man is an artist as far as pointing out techniques on how to weather things. So definitely it's good to have him back into the world.
Even though he looks like he should be a biker, not a model railroader.
Well, he's from Boston.
Oh, he's a heavy metal rock and roller. Come on.
He is actually. His dad worked in the recording industry for a number of years, so yeah, he did grow up in that world.
That's great news, Pat, because so many of these places are one-man operations, and when they go, they're gone.
But what's interesting is it seems like because things became kind of more electronic, there's a set of intellectual property value in these small companies, and there's a couple of folks that seem to be kind of trying to roll up categories and buying these up. I mean, you've seen that with Wiseman, and there's a guy doing the same thing in the narrow gauge, the O-scale narrow gauge side. Because I think what's interesting is if you get something that's designed, recreating that in a different technology or redoing it is getting easier with 3D printing, et cetera. So it's going to be interesting to see some of those things that kind of went away may come back because the designs can be sold.
I say the people who bought Grant Line and was it San Juan models, and I think they've got one other, and so yeah, and that's thing I say is encourage these people because they're what we need to keep things going for those of us who want to do fine scale modeling. Are you trying to talk, Phil? Because you're muted.
Earl, can you mute Larry iPhone? He's got a vibration buzzer going on that's coming through the meeting. You just click on him and you can mute him. There, yeah.
Oops. And he just unmuted himself.
Yeah, so Earl, if you click on him, you can mute him. There you go. Cool. Anybody else got anything else that's interesting for discussions?
Yeah, Phil, I have something to Dave Connery. One of the products that I've kind of used in some of my presentations is a product that, I don't know if you can see this, it's called Killer Red tape. It's a tape that, this particular one is a half-inch wide tape. I got a tap for about $8. It's 36 yards long, half-inch wide. But some of us also ordered it direct from the manufacturer in 1-inch widths. One of the problems is they make it in 36-inch widths, so you have to buy 36 rolls at one time, and that's more than what anybody would use in a lifetime. But it's a tape where you put the tape down, you pull off the mylar, and all you have left is the glue. And it's really good for using anytime you're applying things. Some of the things that I've used in the past. These are samples of products that I've glued with this. And maybe a little note. One of the things that I learned over the years is if I see an article in a magazine about a technique, what I try to do is make a little sample of it for myself. If I don't do that, I'll forget about that technique when the opportunity arises to use it. If I have a little sample, I've already done it, and then I'll tend to remember it. And then I have these samples all over the place that I've used. But what my point was is that Brian Booth, I'm not sure if he's on the call this morning, but he, about a couple of weeks ago, told me about a different product. Now this Killer Red leaves, I think, an 0.08 mil layer of glue. And he discovered an item that's a 3M product. It's number 465, 3M 465. It's a tape that has like a glossy paper instead of a mylar backing to it. It works exactly the same. You put the tape down, peel off the backing, and then you can laminate almost anything onto it. And so I did some samples of different things, but it works really well. It's very, very thin. There's no thickness to it at all. And I got mine from McMaster's car. It's about, I think it was about $21 for a roll that's 60 yards long and 1 inch wide, 60 yards. So that's almost a lifetime supply probably of a lot of buildings.
Yeah, it goes by the name of transfer tape.
Yeah, in fact, they call it glue on a roll.
Okay.
How strong is the adhesive?
I'm sorry?
It lasts forever.
Yeah,
Okay, I mean, it holds well, and Glass, okay.
The test that I've done, it holds just as good as any glue that I've seen. But the nice thing about it, and I haven't tried this, but here, if you've used Killer Red, you know that you spend quite a bit of time trying to get underneath that Mylar to pull it off, the red Mylar. With this stuff, you can just take your finger. I put this on the other day. I'm peeling it off right in front of you there, just with my fingernail. Comes off really easy. That makes it a lot easier to use. And the glue, you can see the difference. The glue is really, really flat.
I've been using it. I've been using it for quite some time for putting shingles on roofs, and it comes, you know, a lot of different widths, you know, that you can play with. Or, you know, the Killer Red is really good too.
How sticky is it compared to Killer Red?
I find it just as sticky, Jim.
Is it? Can you reposition after you put things on? Because actually, Killer Red is almost too sticky sometimes.
Yeah, it is. I have not. You cannot reposition it if it's a paper product. It's there. One of the techniques that I haven't really tried, but Ray Davis, his wife, suggested it is after you put the tape down, if you put on a coat of glue stick, just wipe the glue stick over it. Then you put your paper and you can move it around, get it set, and then over time that glue stick will disappear and you'll be attached with the Killer Red or this 465 tape. So this roll anyway cost me about $30, but about $8 of it was shipping, and then there's tax.
Okay.
I got mine from McMaster's car.
Sweet.
One of the things that last week Steve Van Meter asked about was using there's somebody.
So this is an interesting thing. I just happened to notice. I went and looked for transfer tape, and I found this. This is actually a dispenser that's designed to take the paper backing off and let you put that there and literally roll the adhesive on in a line. I mean, because I actually happen to go look for it. What I do, by the way, when you mention something like this, I do what you do. I go on my browser, I find it, and I bookmark the page. And I've got a series of railroad bookmarks of things that people mention that I go find on the internet. So I was going to mark that. When I did it, I saw this. I thought that was really interesting. If you were doing a roof, you could just literally go across the roof and lay it down on the roof, and it's like kind of a glue layer. Anyway, I'll stop sharing. Great concept.
So anyway, Steve asked about putting a layer of dull coat down and then putting an alcohol on top of it, which causes the dull coat to blush, and on corrugated metal that emulates the weathering of the metal as it oxidizes. So I tried the latest, a brand new can of dull coat. It doesn't work quite as well as the old brand, but I did get some blushing. So I think it'd be probably a couple layers to do that. But and like I say, it isn't quite as pronounced as the original dull coat, but it definitely does have some sense of oxidation to it.
Yeah, there's been talk on some of the forums that they've reformulated dull coat, and it doesn't work quite as well as it used to.
That's correct.
Blushing.
Yeah.
And by the way, alcohol dissolves the adhesive in the transfer tape. Ask me how I know that.
Earl, you've been holding out on me. I didn't know about this stuff. There's an adhesive item to own.
Yeah, I've been using the transfer tape to do shingles on roofs for quite a while now. And it's really nice. It's faster than the white glue and doing the strip by strip. Also, the roof doesn't get all wet and buckle on you.
One thing I use.
If you use alcohol washes though for coloring on the, do you have issues then with adhesion on the underlying?
No, as long as you don't flood it too much. I just got an area really wet the one time. It was doing something strange and it loosened up.
Okay, good to know.
one awesome thing with transfer tape is there's some things you can glue together that you can't normally glue together. Like I've done like plastic to brass sheet, which is a very good way to add weight to like, flat cards and things like that. Is basically I take like a, plastic sheet with, like the sheeting or something like that, car side, something like that. And I put brass underneath it. And that way you've got the brass, but you've also got the plastic surface you can paint and distress. So you get the weight, but you also get the far more easily finished and modified surface.
And just so people know, the intent of the transfer tape, it is a permanent adhesive. It's not something that's supposed to dry up and lose grip over time. It's supposedly permanent.
The one downside with all this is that over the years ago, I used to lick a lot of Campbell shingles to build my roofs, and I'm kind of having withdrawal from the taste of that glue.
Yeah.
Maybe it was other ingredients other than the taste.
It's not the kind of glue you sniff, Dave. You got to be more selective.
So Jim's been working there on something while we've been talking. He's been painting, so.
He's even gotten some paint on the subject, including himself.
Yeah.
A little bit, yeah. Nothing special, just the same potato house I was working on a couple weeks ago.
Cool.
Been making up shingles, and that's a long process. Not that long, but I mean, it takes some time. Because it's a big area.
And the other
It's just, you have to take a lot of paper, paint it, cut it up, notch it, excuse me.
I guess getting choked up over shingles.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but there's some sample shingles that I put together. And I've done this process on other models that I've done in the past. So making your own shingles is pretty easy, especially if you've got either transfer tape or some other method of gluing them down.
So you put them down individually there?
I didn't get you pinned while you were waving it around.
Let me get a better sample of it, actually.
While we're waiting for Jim to come back, the transfer tape that David talked about, it does come in, a number of different widths. It's available on Amazon and
Oh, nice. Sorry, Earl. Very nice.
So yeah, when you make your own shingles, it's like, it saves you a lot of money, but it's a pain in the ass.
Those look great, though. Those look fabulous.
Yeah, they look good when it's done.
I think individual shingles, probably if you're willing to take the time and do them well, is probably the best way to replicate the real world. Just it seems to me it's a lot of work.
It's kind of a pain in the butt, but I think it's worth it.
It looked great.
No, it looks great. Absolutely.
Yeah, I had done a clinic on the past on this, but it's been a while.
So if you guys are interested, one of the things I showed a while back was using RJ6 or Cat5 and RJ6 connectors for wiring. Is anybody doing that, using those very much as wiring on your layout? The wiring they use for Ethernet, basically everybody's familiar with the cable and the plug you plug it into. What you don't realize is that behind the plug, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of components to let you get at those wires. And so it turns out the Cat5 is a great way to think about it. It's 8 wires, 4 pairs that you can run from point A to point B. And once you get it there, it makes it really easy to do your wiring. Because it turns out if you think about a DCC wired railroad, you have heavy wires for the bus wires for DCC, but literally everything else on the layout can be 22 gauge wire because it's all just signaling wire, signaling information. And so one of the things we've been doing is at the club in Pleasanton on the O side, we've been moving to all of our new rewiring we're using Cat5 wiring for everything except for the main power bus wiring. And so one of the things we actually have done is we've done that for switches. So I don't know if you guys are interested, I'll show what we've done because it's a really interesting, cool way of wiring switches. So if you guys see this, you can. So by the way, this was the idea for this kind of event of doing about a 5-minute CeD Talk, like the TED Talks. So one of the things we did when we looked at this was we have a lot of operations. When a switch changes, you want to change it out quickly, and the wiring became a big issue. At the same time, we decided to use Cat5. We've been using Cat5 for a bunch of things. We bought a whole bunch of Cat5, like 5,000 feet. And we started looking at things like switch machine runs for signaling. So if you look at an interlock district for signaling, you've got 2 wires for the switch, but then when you look at the stands, you end up with about 10 wires to support all the LEDs and the switching stands and the light stands for that interlocked area. So if you take 2 Cat5s, you actually have enough wire to support everything for a switch to run back to wherever your control panel location is. And we're using the Chubb decoder system for that. So it just turns out, Cat5, because of the way it's wired, turns out to make a lot of wiring easily. So we actually end up applying exactly the same thing to tortoises. So the idea started with can we use these for tortoises? And what we came up with was this connector, and I'll get the part number. I don't have it here in the presentation. I should have had it there. It's actually a punch-down connector for 8 wires that has an RJ45 plug. And what we did was we glued those to the top of the tortoise just with Gorilla Glue, and then ran wires over and soldered the wires into the tortoise. So now you have basically an RJ45 connector on each tortoise. And then what you can do is actually wire those. So this is on the module. This is how it's wired. Is what you do is you connect the RJ45 that plugs into the tortoise, and here it's running a relatively short distance. It runs over here to where there's a wabbit, and what you do is just pin out to the wabbit. So each one of the switches ends up having, this is 2 switches together wired to a wabbit. It kind of looks congested here, but the reality is the wiring is really easy because the pinouts are all pre-coded. So the wires always go to exactly the same place, and I'll show you the diagram of that for the next time. Literally wiring one of these takes about 15 minutes once you get the design done. You use what's called the B pattern and just they tune it at either end. This is actually a wiring diagram which shows you with those connectors and the B pattern where the connections are. This was done for the layout in Pleasanton. So we've got our switch power for the Frog. Even though it's O-scale, we power the Frog off of the tortoise contacts. They're only rated for 1 amp, but that 1 amp is for opens and closes. When the contacts are closed, they're actually rated for between 5 and 7 amps. And if you look at the Frog on a switch, the only engine you actually have on the Frog are the trucks of 1 engine. So if you've got 4 O engines that are drawing 8 amps, you're only drawing a couple of amps on the 1 engine that's on the Frog. So we've actually gone to not having relays, but actually just using these for Frog power. And so then you've got the outside or the motor, and then the other side is used for switching lights and a relay. And so this is actually for the module. This was the wiring diagram for the wabbits. So what you can see is it's really easy. You just take the cable that comes from switch A, and you can see which colors go where and where to plug them in over here. You just kind of follow them over and say, oh, wire 1 from switch A, you take the output of that, that's the brown and white, and it goes into pin 4 on this side of the wabbit, which is the output. And makes the wiring very easy to do. And so these were some installation instructions. and how to do that. So that was basically a quick presentation. I don't know if that's of interest, but I think this RJ6, the Cat5 RJ6 wiring stuff is a really great way to wire a module, because you can basically run 3 or 4 cables out to a location and have all your signaling in those cables, and they're just plug and play on either end.
Phil, I do the same thing. Obviously, I'm a communications guy too. I just posted a couple of links for some RJ45 to Tortoise products that model railroad control systems that's the make, including one that has the edge connector, so you just stick it right on
Stick it on there. Yep.
And then a couple of varieties of RJ45 to 8-wire breakouts. So it can all be used with the scheme Phil described, and you, in many cases, don't even have to bother getting the B connector.
Right. No, it just, I think it's, I think it's great. Think about it. It's a great way to wire a layout and eliminates, and I see so many layouts, you look underneath them and it's just this melange of wires, because what happens, we need 4 wires or 6 wires from here to here, we ran 6 wires. And the problem is they never, ever get documented. The beauty of the RJ45s is if you just document the whole cable and say, I start cable 1 and put a 1 on either end, from then on, you find everything on your layout. Because within the cables, because they're all color-coded, within every cable, everything's all defined. I'm a electrical engineering guy, come from this, and I've come into so many places, and I look at the wiring, and I realize it's virtually impossible to troubleshoot it down the line. So it's kind of an interesting thought if you're starting out or looking at rewiring. We're actually looking at a DC layout in Pleasanton that was wired with block control. What we're going to do is we're going to rebuild it where we're going to take the main line, just the main line blocks, put a relay out at the edge of where the actual wiring block is, where the leads are to the tracks, run the DC at one side of the relay, and then put DCC boosters out more locally and run them to the other side of the relay and have one switch where you switch it one way, the whole layout's DCC. You switch it the other way, it takes the main blocks on the main line and switches those relays to DCC, turns off the DCC, and basically all you can do is run tracks DC on the main line, because we wanted to retain a DC capability for members that had non-DCC engines to run. But what's beautiful is once you get done with that, we're just going to use Cat5 from where the booster area is and where the chub area is. We're just going to run a couple of Cat5s over to wherever there's a switch location to pick up all the wiring. And it's going to make the rewiring, I think, dramatically easier, because you can just literally cookie cut and replicate everything. And you can do almost all the work on the bench. You literally, think about the idea of getting to the point where you put a switch in, run 2 screws in, plug a wire into it, run the wire, but plug it to a board, and all your work under the layout's done. No soldering, nothing. That's and like I said, I'd love to see, I need to look at what Seth's done, because I think if you ever build a layout, really thinking through using this wiring in the right way, you can make it much easier to wire it, but dramatically simpler to troubleshoot down the line.
Well, absolutely. Anyway. And I mean, 2 other plugs for this concept. Patch panels exist. You can very often find them at very reasonable prices at surplus places. Cat5 is twisted fairly tightly, which actually has huge benefits in controlling noise from, primarily DCC these days, but also old twin coil switch machines, stuff that gets into various other electronics. If you run Cat5, the tight twisting gives you very good noise rejecting without having to manage shielding and ground distribution and all of those issues. So you're riding on the back of 150 years of telecom distribution on how to do this stuff cleanly.
Hey, if you want to go buy some surplus stuff, they also sell 48 pin wiring that was done for the old traditional telephony wiring. And you can buy those where you buy a punch out and it actually goes to the RJ45s and goes to one of those. So like if you have an area from your main control area over to a sub area, you could run 2 or 3 of those 48 pair cables over there, or 24 port cables, and just have all your wiring in about 4K. And you can buy those used, a 50-foot one of those on eBay for cheap. Because what's happening is everybody's tearing out all the old telephony infrastructure, and you can buy it used on eBay, and it's actually really good. By the way, another interesting use for this, if you're going to build a layout, I would do a lighting scheme. put in 24 ports of lighting. You can buy one of those 24 port controllers or do whatever, just run a 24 port bus around your layout to maybe 5 or 6 locations, break it out there. You've now got 24 ports of lighting that you can control and have those turn on and off at different times and use them in different buildings all around the layout. Same scheme would be great to build a lighting bus to support your whole layout. Buy one of those Christmas controllers with 24 channels, build a program where you turn channels on and off randomly, and now you just pick lights, and it's just all punch downs. I mean, you literally bring 2 wires down. You've got a 48-pin connector coming into a block that's got 48 punch downs, where you just punch a wire in and it connects, and you put that there, and you bring 2 wires down with lights and just clip them in, and bingo, you got lights in the building, and they're tied to a circuit where you can program it from a central location to go on and off at certain times to have randomization of lighting effects. So the same wiring can be used, I think, for a lot of really interesting applications in building a model railroad.
Yeah.
I use the Cat5 for block detection. I use the CT coils with the our circuits, and so it's really nice. You can run 4 of the coils off of 1 wire. And if I'm going between sections for my layout, I just use a set of connectors, and I can break the cable and then reattach it, pull a module out, work on it, put it back in. So that's really handy, and there's a lot of guys that are doing it for that. The other area I've experimented with and I've had mixed success on is I use the Tam Valley Octopus 3s for servo control for turnouts, and also use it for their relays. And what's interesting is you can use the Cat5 to control the servo. It's been done a lot, and that seems to work real well. But where I have had problems is trying to run the relay side of it, the control side, through the Cat5. For some reason, if I run 2 relays through the same wire, it's fine. As soon as I add 3, or start to get to too much, there is some kind of interference between the 2, and so you'll flip one turnout and the other one will start to
Are
move.
you using back bias diodes across the relays? That will suppress the spikes when the coils lose their field when you turn it off, and that's a major cause of electrical noise. So just a back biased 1N4001 or something like that. I'd be happy to give you some drawings offline, but it's pretty easy.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that might be something I might reach out to you on, because that would actually solve a lot. But if you're doing anything where you're sectional, or I wouldn't call myself modular, I'm just building in sections on my layout. Getting continuous wiring from one area to the next, connectors are always the challenge, and the RJ45 is easy. And if you do punch down and you have the female connector, there's a million plates and brackets and all kinds of stuff. So I just use the you can go to Home Depot and buy cover plates. Monoprice sells the stuff cheap, and just I just mount it underneath a module, and then I'll buy a 99-cent patch cable, and I can just just plug that in and use that to connect pieces together. It's also great when you're trying to test something, because then you can just plug in one segment and figure out what's working and what's not working. So the RJ45 is a really easy one to do.
Yeah, communications is mostly about wiring hygiene. The one thing we really learned in the comms business, both traditional telephony and data, is it's mostly about wire management in the end of the day. And that has huge lessons for model railroading.
Cool. Well, I think it's actually an interesting topic, and one that I haven't seen a lot of writing up on using that stuff. I think a lot of people are starting to do it, but it hasn't been really well identified yet. So that's good. Anybody else got anything else to bring up and discuss?
John looked like he wanted to talk about his N-scale weathering, and I see that video there. I'd like to hear more about that.
I just had a couple more that I did from last time, or since last time, and thought I'd show them and take whatever feedback or whatever. I added some additional weathering to the one I showed last week too. But can you guys see that? Is it big enough?
That looks great.
Okay, so that's the junk hopper.
actual size too. I'm impressed.
Yeah. So I'm trying to make sure that the webcam can stay in focus this time. It seems like it's doing a better job this time.
I don't think it's a junk hopper anymore, John. I think you're gonna have to put that one in the service.
Yeah, my intention.
Like it's a contest entry.
Well, I don't know about that, but my intention is to put these onto the South Bay Historical Railroad Society's in-scale layout so that people can pull them around.
So you've done really, really well, and I think you've learned the basic trick. You can't screw it up too badly.
Well, my approach here really was just, it's kind of hard to tell because the camera's blowing it up a little bit. It's a lot darker than what it looks like on the screen. And I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but there's a little rusting up on the roof too. But what I was going to say is that my final step on these was to add some rust, because it felt like I remember last time I was telling you guys that it felt like I didn't finish it, like there was something missing on the yellow one. So I added some rust. This one probably looked familiar. You can see I added some rust dripping down wherever there's, let me see if I can get a pointer here. Wherever there's some part of the slide here, the door track that ends, I put rust streaks because I saw some pictures that looked like it had that on it.
Cool.
And then on the other side, it kind of did the same thing. A little more pronounced in some places, which was intentional. I wanted it to look different on each side. So, but I was looking for, feedback or criticism or something, that keeping in mind that I did not do this with prototype photos. I did this really because I'm trying to understand how the materials I'm using interact with the surface of the paint. And I used washes first. I think I told you acrylic washes first. Then I used some weathering powder. Then I used some pan pastels. And I also hit little highlights with the colored pencil to pick out some of the stuff that raises up off of the background. And it kind of did that with all of these. I don't know if you can tell, but the colored pencil really shows up on the tack board on the ends. I tried to sort of highlight it because, light would hit something like this and it doesn't scale down. So I thought maybe some colored pencil to pick out the highlights on the tack board would make it look better or make it stand out more. So, but that's it. I just, and I did that same thing with the boxcar. Did some colored pencil on the tack board there and also on some of these little edges. You see how it's kind of white on the edges? Sort of looks like a light reflection or something. So
looks really good.
I don't know if I'm ready to go and weather one of my expensive models, but I know I'm a lot closer now than I was before I did this. And I still have about five or six more junky old N-scale models that I want to weather. 5 of them have those crappy Rapido hook couplers, the old ones for N-scale, or Rapido Arnold horn hooks, I guess. And so I'm thinking about trying to find some cheap used cheap used Microtrains truck mounted coupler or trucks with couplers on them so that I can put those when I get them weathered onto the SBHRS layout too, because they use knuckle couplers at SBHRS. And I thought about making just a transition car with a horn hook on one side and a real coupler on the other side, but I'm afraid that there are some people that run there that would see that and be like, well, what's this? I don't even understand how this works. And then who knows what would happen to them? Like, oh, these are the wrong couplers. I think I'll throw them out or just take them home or, whatever. So,
well,
anyway.
You can always go by the train shop. They're now open 11 to 4, and you can pick up your stuff. You have to wear a mask, but I was in there yesterday. So Dennis is back. Dennis and Karen are both running the world again.
We need to wear masks anyway, Pat. We look better that way.
That's what Finis said to me also. I am trying to understand that.
Right. So anyway,
yeah, they are opening up again, so that's another place to go lose money.
Right. Thing is, I'm kind of hesitant to spend money on good trucks to put on these old crappy lifelike cars. It just seems like a waste of money. So I may just weather the crap out of them. Just throw, ask someone where I could throw them on the layout just as scenery,
Yeah, that's, if they start looking like good cars, you put the good trucks into them, and now they are good cars.
Yeah.
That's what's the difference between a good car and a bad car is how it runs and how it looks. Well, the trucks will take care of part of that, and your weathering takes care of the other part.
Right. Well, we'll figure it out. But I'm pretty happy with the way these other ones turned out. I mean, to the point where I may just find a prototype photo of one of the other cars that I want to do a job on and just see if I can get it close, That's kind of a challenge.
I think your weathering turned out great, John. It's nice and subtle. You really don't see streaks or anything like that. It looks like just random grit along the bottom. I like it.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Earl. That means a lot coming from you.
This may be something we can do for next, when we have Coast Division meets again, is to have, instead of a modeling contest per se, have a weathering, either a weathering exposition or weathering contest. Just bring in a car that's weathered and put them all out there so people can see how everybody's doing it. And if you want to make a popular vote for, a free soda from the snack bar or something, that'd be.
One thing, I feel really basic. I'm just doing these stupid little weathering projects, and you guys are getting all technical with your track things and your switches and all that stuff. I'm over here just going, wow, what? I don't even understand the language you're talking.
That's safer sometimes.
Yeah.
So with that, I'll throw up something else on that technical side. So anybody's interested. This is, can you guys see that reasonably well? So that is, if I turn it over, you'll see on this side, it's a piece of white plastic cut with 5 super caps glued on it and a Zener diode and a resistor. This is a homemade $5 keep alive. And it's wrapped, if you kind of look at me, you can see it there. I was on a video here a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about this shrink wrap tape, which is really thin. And so this thing is actually wrapped with that shrink wrap tape. And it's a really great way of your home electronics. You just basically cut this, put it on there, hit it with a heat gun, and wrap it. And so it's basically, you can take this and connect this onto the wire points on any decoder, where you can put a keep alive, which is basically the backside of the diode bridge on the decoder. This will connect there, and it'll give you, probably 10 to 20 seconds of running time on maybe 30 seconds on an HO engine. So, and I bought 100 of the capacitors, I think, for $10. So these are 5. So that's, 20 keep alives for $10. So if you're interested in making keep alives, it's an interesting way to build them.
Would you do us possibly a favor and throw up a real short article about
that? No, I
put
can.
It on, get it to ship and get it into the branch line.
Yep. No, it's a really cool way of building these. And if you do DCC, if you haven't used one of these, it just eliminates all of your track issues. The downside is that the engine will keep running if you lose control of it, which has some disadvantages in certain cases when people throw a switch to a sideline where it runs off the track. But someone was talking about they get flicker in their car lights or flicker in their engine or anything. These just take care of it. So, and they're a lot cheaper than the ones that you buy, which I think are about 25 to 30 bucks.
Phil, how big is that? How does that compare to like a current keeper or the current KA?
It's a little fatter than the current keeper because of the way, if you look at the way the diode sticks out on the side. Right. But if you look at the dimensions of the plastic on the bottom, it's about 1.2 inches by 0.4 inches, 0.5 inches. So it's about a little over an inch. This way, it's a little more than an inch. This way is about a half an inch, and it's about 3/8 of an inch thick.
Well, that's comparable. That's not bad.
It is pretty, because by the way, the size of these is driven by the capacitors. If you look at the one from Soundtracks, you can actually see the 5 capacitors in there underneath. They're actually, if you look at them and you put the 2 up, I didn't bring one of those up. If you put them up, the capacitors look exactly the same, the size of them underneath. The thing that makes this kind of big off to the side is there's the size of, this is the Zener diode here. So what the Zener diode does is it clamps the voltage on the 5 capacitors so it doesn't get too high and damage them. And that actually, when you buy those, I think the ones they use are smaller than that. That was the one I bought, and it's pretty good. If you look at it, it's pretty good sized on the side there.
If you want to publish that, I would be happy. If there's interest, I make up a little circuit board design and do it with a surface mount diode, and that'll take care of this.
Yeah, exactly. I did this. I did this like what all I did was I just used Walther's glue, and I glued the supercapacitors to that piece of plastic, and they're just all soldered on the side that's towards you. I mean, basically, you just glue the capacitors down and you just chain solder them and then loop them around and put the resistor in and make a little package up. But yeah, no, making a board would be great if you had a bunch of, because you build a whole bunch of them for nothing practically.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they could be panelized like 12 up or something, and I'd sell the board for $5. So
exactly, it'd be a great way to do it. Yeah, and by the way, I found the design online. I didn't create it. It was something somebody had online. So
Yeah, I'm just having a bill of materials so we could know, okay, I'm going to go down to whoever or go online and buy this item from this source. It makes it easier for some of us.
Let me get with Seth too about making the board, because he can take whatever I've got and make a better design than I can, but then I'll write something up because I think it's a really cool way of doing it. And I'm 100% convinced personally that keep alives are absolutely essential. In OM30 we do it. For the modular stuff, it's eliminated all of the stalling problems. Somebody has an issue where they didn't put they've got a lot of people use the Pico tracks, and the Picos have the rails actually have selection on them, on the frog ones. And if you don't put a separate in, you have problems with that. And this just eliminates, just run through it where there's one of those on the layout very simply and easily. I also like the idea that if I turn the module off and I leave and I walk by the room a minute later, the engine's still running there, which is kind of a cool feature. I'm serious. On soundtracks on an OM30 engine, the sound will run for 1 minute to 2 minutes after you turn the power off.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Is there a way to configure them so that maybe you only have like a 2 or 3 second keep alive, so that it just gets you through the frogs and the bad spots in the track?
Use less taps. Just don't put all the capacitors in. They're all on parallel, so you just store less energy and it'll run.
Yeah, I mean,
actually on these they're not. They're in series.
They are, okay.
The way these work, so the way a keep alive works is a capacitor is defined by the amount of energy it holds. It turns out the way a capacitor works, it's 2 sheets of basically metal separated by an insulator. And so what happens is you get all these electrons on one side on one sheet, and there are no electrons on the other side on the other sheet. And all those electrons really want to get to the other side, but the insulation's keeping them from getting there. And that's what builds up the capacitance, that the energy level that grows in a capacitor. So it turns out what's really important is how you isolate those 2 sheets. So what happened is when they started building 3.5 volt electronics, they wanted to keep those alive. So like if the battery died, they could flush the cache in your processor. So they developed those little 3.5 volt capacitors as keep alive, as basically for the processor itself to keep it, that if the power goes off for a moment, you don't lose the processor. So those 3.5 volts, so they're only designed to have 3.5 volts between the dielectric, between the 2 sheets. If you go over 3.5 volts, they burn out. But what that does is, because it's such a low voltage, it allows them to have much more energy because the sheets are thinner, because the voltage won't jump. So because limiting it to 3.5 volts, you get like a megafarad in one of those little capacitors. So those 5 little capacitors, for equivalent to a 30 volt capacitor, will be a capacitor like this. Because you have to have you lose so much energy when you move the plates apart because of adding that that additional dielectric material because of the voltage. So the way the keep alives work is they take 5 of those 3.5 volt capacitors and they wire them in series, which means now together they can store 14 volts of energy. Each one's storing 3 volts, but it adds up to 14 volts. So actually, the way you would do it is you probably would just go to smaller supercapacitors. You probably could buy ones that are even smaller, but they have to be the same because it's really the way the dielectric is built inside the capacitor that's fundamentally different than the big cap. So like if you look at the cap you get with a Soundtrax decoder that you put on, that's only on the sound circuit side, and it's designed to keep the sound circuit side alive if you have a dropout, so you don't have a sound dropout. Those capacitors are 30-volt capacitors. If you look at that capacitor, it has maybe 100th the capacity of one of those capacitors, the supercaps, because of the thinness of the dielectric. It's just a really interesting electrical characteristic. I know whoever figured out to take advantage of that, I'd really like to meet because it was really smart. The idea that you can add them up to get to 15 volts. That was a really great insight by somebody in the model railroading community 5 to 7 years ago.
Okay, again, just a simple thing to get you through those Payco switches. It's about all I would want.
Yeah, that's about what you want. To get through when you're running, you want to be able to run about 15 or 20 inches. That's about what the Keep Alive will do on an HO engine. Mm-hmm. 15 inches to a foot and a half, or 15 inches, 2 feet.
Perfectly adequate.
Exactly. And it's.
Yeah, I've been using Keep Alives for ever since they came out, and my biggest issue has always been fitting everything in the tender in small brass and HO scale.
Yeah.
So for me, it's always the size that's the problem. And so I'm curious to see, how small we can make these things, and they're getting smaller, which is good to see.
The other thing to really think about is, you can take those capacitors and break them apart.
Yeah.
So you could put 4 capacitors with the ends of the capacitors out, painted and weathered, underneath looking like some sort of tanks underneath an engine, and just wire them together underneath the engine. And it's actually interesting. I've seen that where you can take it and you can make them, an air tank somewhere. So.
Yeah, I received a donation of this wonderful little SP tender, and of course it's an old 30 years ago DC tender, so I've got to somehow remove the front plate and cram the electronics in there. So if anybody's got any ideas, I'm welcome to I'd love to hear them.
Cutting into brass is always exciting, I guess. But I think we talked about that with another one of those. The problem with those SP tenders is the way they're built in brass. It's impossible to get into them from the bottom. Kind of the only way is to get in through the face that faces towards the cab and cut that out. I think if you're really, the really good way to do it would be to cut it out, break the solder joints, take that plate off, and put it on a hinge, so you can hinge it open and close to get to the electronics.
I was thinking about just taking it out, running a cutting disc, take out the circular piece at the bottom underneath. Yep. And then replacing it with a piece of plastic after I finished.
Yep.
No soldering involved.
Those are challenging. When they built them 30 years ago, they never thought about anybody getting inside of them.
I know. And yet the availability of DCC-able small tenders like this is almost nil.
Yeah. Has anybody tried cutting in from the top and then replacing it with a flat plate?
Well, yeah, I've looked at taking the plate, the oil tank, the top of the oil tank off, this piece right here,
mm-hmm.
and coming in that way. I still need to get in and do something about the electrical wiring for the trucks. I've got to isolate the trucks, and it's a real mess. I almost want to give it. You say that looks nice, just leave it. Someone suggested I just dummy it completely and put everything in the engine.
I've done that a couple of times. It's not as satisfactory, but it does work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on the size of the engine too, probably. I mean, it's a smaller engine, it's gonna be the same
well,
problem.
The engine is a different. It's a much more recent. The one C9 that I've got, much more recent. But it came with a whale back tender, which is easy to convert because you can unscrew it and everything else. Matter of fact, it's already been somebody put a tsunami in it and DCC'd it a while back, and before I got it. And now the only thing I need to put on that one is a keep alive, and that'll be perfect. But I'd like to be able to swap out the tender and put in a Vanderbilt tender as well.
Bachmann also makes the tender. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah, I've got one in pieces that I tried to fix the fact that Bachmann wired it completely up weirdly.
You got one of those too, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they look good.
Well, I think it just rewire the whole tender and then that whole piece, and that might work. That's all from me at this point.
And a point is that for those like Bill, when I asked him to do the article for the branch thing, that all counts towards your author points for your AP too. So you're helping yourself as well as helping the rest of us.
So I don't know if this is going to show or not. I figured I'd share a load project I did. Let's see. Where is it? So this is steel beams on a flat car.
Looks good so far, yeah.
And it's oversized. And it, let's see. So all the loading for the tie down stuff came from I borrowed from Pat the loading diagrams, and so I tried to replicate them as much as possible. Like I said, even these, let's see these guys down here. Where am I? Which is a real pain in the butt to make. Ended up having to make a jig in order to try to fit those things in. So, and actually it served a great purpose in that this is a ready to run flat car, and one corner of the deck wasn't glued on right, so it's got that corner's got a little ski jump, but luckily it was at the A end, so it pretty well hides it, you know. And so I don't know, I just thought it was a fun thing to make. Took a while, but you know, because it's just a lot of fussing around. I used the strapping was like 1x8 styrene, and nut bolt washer. You can't see them. Yeah, nut bolt washer where they would otherwise be bolted in, and wood blocking. And the other difference is I had to basically make the blocking that goes around here to hold it in place taller because it's sitting on sleepers, so it would have vertical clearance to the idler car. So anyway, and a little bit of try different weathering ideas. I don't know how well this thing focuses. Yeah. So anyway, just something different.
Did you weather the flat car before you put the load on?
Oh yeah, yeah. I just pan pasteled it. It probably the trucks would use a little bit more. And then the deck I used kind of borrowing from Tony Thompson. I used some of the colored pencils and randomly color different boards, and then I brush it with a thin Tamiya gray paint. And so it mutes it down, but you still get that little variegation, you know, so it's just not that uniform look. So I think that helps a bit.
When you run it on the railroad, do you have to put a red flag on the back of the steel beams, just like we do when I carry wood in my car out on the road that doesn't close the trunk?
Yeah, well, if I don't put the idler car in there, it makes it tough to get the caboose on. So there's an idler flat. But yeah, that would be a good detail. I'm not quite sure how prototypical it would be, but it would get some people's interest maybe.
I always thought that was kind of a cool, the difference between a well-weathered car and a load that was obviously new was this really cool contrast, because it really lets you see the weathering in a more obvious way when you're looking at it, when you have that difference. That was cool.
Yeah, of course, one thing I noticed is that, because I'm around a lot of construction sites, I mean, steel comes in and it's in all sorts of, it's a whole variety of shape. I mean, they were building a building down here in San Carlos right off the freeway. And I finally stopped one morning to take pictures of all, when they were first roughing in the steel. And, it was from a light gray to a rust wash. It all depends how long that piece of steel sat in the yard, until they brought it in to fabricate it and ship it.
That'd be an interesting thing to try to model that variation.
Yeah, well, I took a bunch of pictures from all four sides just to keep for future reference. It was one of those deals. One time I was driving down the freeway and there's a load of steel going by me, and I tried to get the camera out and get the picture, and I wasn't fast enough. And so this case, it was easier to get because it was stationary. So.
The hazards of photos. I actually went down to Moss Landing. I'm doing the module, and I wanted to get some pictures, and I found out across the field the original footings for one of the bridges for the railroad that was through there. But to get pictures of it, I had to walk about 300 feet, and I ignored all of the underbrush, and I came back. It basically cost me a pair of shoes and a pair of socks. It definitely cost me a pair of socks. I think it probably cost me a pair of shoes because there's so many stickers in the shoes inside. I don't know how I'm ever going to get them out of there. But I got some good pictures. So hopefully your steel didn't cost you anything to get pictures.
That's why you get a telephoto, Phil.
Yeah, I had the telephoto, and I took it, and I decided I wanted to get closer, and I didn't really think it through until I started walking. I started getting this itching down around my feet. I had those low socks on, and literally between the socks and the shoes, there was like 500 stickers on either side that I had to pull out.
Yeah.
The hazards of model railroading.
Yeah, in this case where I took the pictures from the freeway side, I waited till the weekend when the traffic was down a little bit, and it made you didn't feel quite so exposed pulling off on the shoulder and taking pictures.
So you just keep an old pair of high rain boots or work boots in your car at all times. That's, any rail fan knows you keep basic essentials in the car so you have them when you need them, not when you plan on it.
Any other great modeling focuses for the week?
Yeah, it's been a good session.
I think everybody's kind of quiet. So by the way, I'll make a plea. Anyone who's would like to present something next week, do a review of your layout. Again, if you'd like to do the, gold spike with Earl, please send me an email, and we'll put it on the agenda for next week. It's a great way to talk about what you're doing. And if anybody'd like to do like something with a quick 5-minute talk about something, a technique you're doing, something you've done that you think's unique on your layout. If you do PowerPoint, I'll send you the slide thing. You can do a couple of slides on it. Just a great opportunity to talk about something. And like I said, the thing that's interesting is, like we just saw with that the RJ6 Cat 5 stuff, you may present something, it may turn into a great opportunity to write an article and do something and move from there. So, anybody who's got anything, send me an email and we'll put it on the agenda for next week.
Hey, Ed, or just Phil.
Sure.
Sorry. Just as a side or as a volunteer here, if there's ever a shortage of stuff, and if I'm able to be on the meeting, just let me know a couple days ahead, because I get hundreds of videos that I could share that are all relevant to what we talk about here.
Yep. And that we can, and John, we can definitely, we should probably be thinking about that for next week. We'll schedule something in. Kind of, guys, what I'd love to do is have a couple of things that are kind of pre-scheduled, like Jesse did today. Have somebody do that. Maybe John do a video. Somebody do like the little thing that I did, 5 minutes on a technique, 10 minutes. That gives us about 45 minutes of kind of content, and then we can just have some discussions. It makes it a really, I think this was a very fun activity today. We had enough content. It makes it interesting. So, cool. Well, everybody have a great week, and we will see everybody next week. Same time, same station.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, guys. Have a good
Thank
week.
you, Phil.